The communication chamber of the Galactic Council station fell silent as the last fragments of the transmission faded into static. Ambassador Kethavar of the Altanian Collective stared at the holographic display with all four of his eyes, his blue-scaled hands trembling slightly as he reached for the replay controls. "Play it again," he whispered to the technician, a spider-like being whose multiple limbs danced across the control panel with practiced ease. The message began once more, crackling with interference and desperation. The voice belonged to High Crystalline Zarath of the Zephyrian Coalition, her normally melodic tones distorted by fear and failing equipment. "This is an emergency broadcast to all council members. The Zephyrian Coalition is under attack by unknown entities. They appeared 3 cycles ago from the void between stars. Our defensive fleets cannot even slow their advance. They consume everything in their path, ships, stations. Even the light from our suns grows dim in their presence." The transmission flickered, showing brief images of crystalline cities burning with dark fire, their geometric beauty melting into shapeless slag. Ships that looked like living jewels fled through space, many of them going dark as something unseen overtook them. "We have lost contact with 17 colony worlds. The entities show no interest in communication or negotiation. They simply devour everything they encounter. Our science teams believe they feed on organized matter and energy itself. They are turning our star systems into empty voids." Static overwhelmed the signal for several seconds before Zarath's voice returned, weaker now and filled with static. "The main fleet has been destroyed. I am transmitting our final sensor data and the coordinates of the attacking force's projected path. If anyone receives this message, please. They are heading toward the galactic core. Billions of lives depend on stopping them before." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving only the soft hum of background radiation. Ambassador Kethavar leaned back in his cushioned chair, his normally steady breathing now rapid and shallow. Around the chamber, representatives from dozens of species sat in stunned silence. The Zephyrians were known throughout the galaxy as one of the most advanced civilizations, their crystal-based technology capable of manipulating matter at the quantum level. If they had fallen so completely, what hope did anyone else have? "Surely this is some kind of mistake," said Ambassador Threx, her insectoid features clicking with nervous energy. "The Zephyrians are known for their dramatic storytelling. Perhaps they encountered a new form of stellar phenomenon and misinterpreted it as an attack." "You saw the same images we did," Kethavar replied, his voice heavy with dread. "Those were not natural disasters. Something methodical destroyed those worlds, something that moves with purpose." The chamber erupted in heated discussion as representatives debated the authenticity of the message. The Volantian delegate suggested it might be an elaborate hoax designed to secure additional military aid. The Centaurian ambassador wondered if internal conflicts within the coalition had been exaggerated for political gain. But their arguments fell silent when the next transmission arrived. This time, the message came from the hegemony of Talshara, a militaristic empire known for their powerful warships and aggressive expansion policies. The transmission was brief and professional, delivered by Fleet Admiral Nextor in clipped military tones. "Council Station, this is Admiral Nextor of the 3rd Imperial Fleet. We have lost contact with our forward bases in the Kepler 442 system. Long-range sensors detect massive energy distortions in the area, consistent with large-scale matter dissolution. We are deploying investigation teams, but request immediate council support if these readings are accurate." The transmission ended, but before anyone could respond, 2 more emergency signals flooded the communication array. The Peaceful Botanical Confederacy reported that their agricultural worlds had gone silent overnight. The tech union's automated monitoring stations were detecting impossible energy signatures moving through previously empty space. Ambassador Kethavar stood slowly, his legs feeling unsteady beneath him. In his 40 years of council service, he had never seen anything like this. The affected regions formed a rough line across one spiral arm of the galaxy, a path of destruction that seemed to be heading directly toward the most populated systems. "We need to dispatch the Council Defense Fleet immediately," he announced, his voice carrying across the now quiet chamber. "With respect, Ambassador," replied Fleet Commander Zeftos, a warrior from the proud Draconian species. "Our fleets are designed for maintaining peace between civilized worlds. We carry precision weapons meant to disable enemy ships with minimal casualties. If these reports are accurate, we may be facing something that requires more direct approaches. The truth of those words became apparent over the following days as the Council's elite peacekeeping forces moved toward the crisis zone. The first diplomatic fleet, renowned for resolving conflicts through superior technology and tactical brilliance, simply vanished. Their final transmission showed their ship's shields failing against some invisible force, their crews collapsing as the very air in their vessels seemed to dissolve. The second fleet managed to retreat, but not before losing half their ships to entities that appeared to exist partially outside normal space-time. The survivors reported that conventional weapons passed harmlessly through the attackers, while the creature's touch seemed to unravel matter at the molecular level. As reports continued to pour in, the scope of the disaster became clear. Entire star systems were going dark, their suns dimming to cold ember before vanishing entirely. The attackers, dubbed Devourers by the few survivors, moved like a plague across civilized space, leaving only empty void in their wake. In the Council's emergency session, the assembled representatives faced an uncomfortable truth. Their advanced civilizations, built on principles of careful resource management and minimal environmental impact, had created military forces designed for conflicts between rational beings. They had no experience fighting entities that seemed to exist for the sole purpose of consuming organized matter and energy. "We need to consider unconventional options," Kethvar said quietly, looking around the chamber at the fearful faces of his colleagues. "Perhaps it is time to contact species we have previously considered too." "Primitive for Council membership. You mean the Deathworlders?" Ambassador Threck said, her mandibles clicking with distaste. "Those barbaric races from high gravity, high radiation planets who build their ships like fortresses and their weapons like instruments of total war." "The humans," Kethvar confirmed. "Their homeworld is a Class 12 death world where survival requires constant adaptation to lethal conditions. Their military doctrine emphasizes overwhelming force and redundant systems designed to function even when severely damaged." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity had only recently been granted probationary council membership, and many species still viewed them as crude primitives who solved problems with brute force rather than elegant solutions. But as another report came in of 3 more star systems going dark, Ambassador Kethvar realized that brute force might be exactly what the galaxy needed. "Contact Earth," he ordered the communication technician. "Tell them the galaxy requires their assistance, and may whatever gods they pray to help us all if they cannot succeed where we have failed." The message was sent into the void, carrying with it the desperate hope of billions of beings who had never imagined that their salvation might come from the most dangerous world in known space. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, her weathered hands gripping the railing as she stared out at the assembled fleet through the reinforced viewport. 57 ships hung in formation around Earth's orbital shipyards, their hulls scarred from countless battles against the galaxy's most hostile environments. These were not the sleek, elegant vessels favored by most Council species. Human ships looked like what they were: mobile fortresses designed to survive in places where other races feared to venture. Their hulls were thick layers of ablative armor wrapped around redundant life support systems. Their weapons were built not for precision, but for the complete destruction of anything that threatened human survival. "Admiral, incoming priority transmission from the Galactic Council," reported Lieutenant Commander Martinez, her voice tight with tension. Sarah nodded, not taking her eyes off the fleet. She had been expecting this call ever since the emergency broadcasts had started flooding subspace channels 3 days ago. Reports of entire star systems going dark, of fleets simply vanishing without a trace. The kind of impossible threat that made the Council's politicians remember that humanity existed. "Put it through, Commander." The holographic display flickered to life, showing Ambassador Kethvar's anxious face. The Altanian's blue scales had paled to an almost white color, and his 4 eyes darted nervously as he spoke. "Admiral Chen, I hope this transmission finds you well. The Council requires immediate military assistance with a crisis of unprecedented scale. Unknown entities are systematically destroying star systems across the Orion Arm. Our conventional forces have proven inadequate." Sarah raised an eyebrow. In diplomatic language, inadequate usually meant completely useless. She had seen the scattered reports, the panicked transmissions from survivors. Whatever was out there had torn through some of the galaxy's most advanced fleets like they were made of paper. "What exactly are we dealing with, Ambassador?" she asked. Kethvar's image flickered as he transmitted a data package. "We call them Devourers. They appear to exist partially outside normal space-time and feed on organized matter and energy. They show no interest in communication and seem to exist solely to consume. Our scientists believe they may be entities from another dimension that have found a way to breach into our reality." The tactical display updated as Sarah's crew processed the incoming data. What she saw made her blood run cold. Entire solar systems reduced to empty space as if someone had simply erased them from existence. Fleet engagement records showed Council ships firing uselessly at targets that phased in and out of normal space, while the attackers dissolved matter with a touch. "Our weapons cannot harm them, and our shields provide no protection," Kethvar continued. "They consume the energy from our power cores and use it to grow stronger. Admiral, I will be direct with you. The Council's military forces were designed for civilized warfare between rational beings. We have no experience fighting entities that exist to destroy rather than conquer." Sarah understood what he was really saying. The Council species had built their civilizations on efficiency and elegance. Their ships were marvels of engineering, but they were designed to fight other ships like themselves. When faced with something that operated by completely different rules, their sophisticated tactics became worthless. "What makes you think we'll have better luck?" Sarah asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Because humans come from a world that has tried to kill them every day for millions of years," Kethvar replied bluntly. "Your species has survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, and radiation levels that would sterilize most planets. Your military doctrine reflects this experience. Where we build for efficiency, you build for survival. Where we plan for victory, you plan for endurance." Sarah looked out at her fleet again, seeing it with new eyes. Every ship bristled with weapons designed to punch through asteroid belts and nebular storms. Their reactors were shielded against cosmic radiation that would cook most aliens. Their crews were trained to function in environments that would kill other species within minutes. "We'll need complete tactical data on these Devourers," she said finally. "Ship specifications, crew manifests, and authorization to operate outside Council space regulations. Whatever you require, Admiral. The Council is prepared to grant humanity emergency military authority for this operation." Sarah almost smiled at that. Emergency military authority meant the politicians were desperate enough to let the Deathworlders off their leash. It meant no more restrictions on weapon yield, no more requirements for proportional response, no more complaints about human military doctrine being too aggressive. "Very well, Ambassador. The Terran Defense Fleet will deploy within 6 hours. We'll rendezvous with any Council survivors at the edge of the affected zone." After the transmission ended, Sarah turned to address her bridge crew. These men and women had served with her through campaigns against the crystalline entities of the Vega system, the plasma storms of the Crab Nebula, and the gravitational anomalies near Sagittarius A. They were soldiers forged in the furnace of humanity's expansion into the most dangerous regions of space. Navigation. Plot a course for the Kepler 442 system. Maximum military speed. Aye, Admiral. Course plotted and ready. Communications, send a fleet-wide transmission. All ships are to prepare for extended combat operations in hostile space. Standard Deathworld protocols are now in effect. The acknowledgements came back quickly as the fleet began its departure from Earth orbit. Sarah watched as her ships engaged their drives, their engines burning with the bright blue fire of antimatter annihilation. Unlike the elegant ion drives favored by most species, human ships used brute force propulsion systems that could accelerate at crushing rates. As the fleet moved away from Earth, Sarah reflected on the irony of the situation. For decades, the Council had looked down on humanity as crude barbarians, whose military technology was considered primitive and overly aggressive. They preferred surgical strikes and minimal collateral damage, while humans built weapons designed to completely eliminate threats. But now, faced with an enemy that operated outside the rules of civilized warfare, the galaxy was turning to the species that had never learned to fight fair in the first place. The journey to the crisis zone would take 8 days at maximum military acceleration. As the fleet settled into formation, Sarah reviewed the tactical data one more time. The Devourers seemed to phase in and out of normal space-time, making conventional targeting impossible. They fed on energy and organized matter, growing stronger with each ship they consumed. It sounded like a nightmare scenario for any conventional military force. But Sarah had spent her career fighting nightmares. She had commanded battles inside stellar coronas, where the background radiation would kill unshielded humans in seconds. She had led boarding actions on derelict ships drifting through dark matter clouds. She had learned to think like the hostile universe itself. And now, for the first time in her career, Sarah Chen felt like humanity's violent, uncompromising approach to warfare might actually be an advantage rather than an embarrassment. The Devourers consumed energy and matter to grow stronger, but they had never encountered a species that treated the complete annihilation of threats as a basic survival strategy. They had never faced weapons designed not to disable or capture, but to ensure that nothing dangerous could ever threaten humanity again. As the blue fire of the fleet's engines pushed them toward the void where entire star systems had died, Sarah allowed herself a grim smile. The galaxy was about to learn why Earth was classified as a death world, and why its children were the most dangerous soldiers in known space. The edge of Devourer space looked like a wound in reality itself. Admiral Sarah Chen watched through the reinforced viewports of the UES Defiant as her fleet approached what had once been the thriving Kepler 442 system. Where 5 planets and a medium-sized star should have been, there was only darkness broken by strange, writhing patterns of distorted space-time. Sensor readings are off the charts, Admiral, reported Commander Hayes from the science station. We're detecting massive gravitational anomalies, quantum field fluctuations, and energy signatures that shouldn't be possible according to our understanding of physics. Sarah nodded grimly. The human fleet had been traveling for 8 days through increasingly disturbed space, passing the empty husks of star systems that had been drained of all energy. The destruction was methodical and complete, as if something had carefully extracted every joule of useful energy before moving on to the next target. Any sign of survivors? Picking up a weak distress beacon from the inner system, Admiral. Wait, that's strange. The signal is coming from inside a crystalline structure that shouldn't be able to exist in vacuum. On the tactical display, a small object appeared, highlighted in blue. As the sensors focused on it, the shape resolved into what looked like a living crystal formation about the size of a cruiser, its faceted surface pulsing with dim internal light. "That's a Zephyrian emergency shelter," came a voice from behind Sarah. She turned to see Dr. Elizabeth Ramos, the fleet's xenobiologist, studying the sensor data with fascination. Their species can temporarily merge their consciousness with specially grown crystal matrices when their normal habitats are destroyed. It's how they survive system-wide disasters. Can we communicate with them? Standard radio won't work, but we can try harmonic resonance through the ship's hull. Their language is based on crystalline vibrations. Sarah made the decision quickly. Do it and prepare a rescue shuttle. We need to know what we're facing out here. 20 minutes later, the shelter was safely docked in the Defiant's cargo bay, surrounded by a hasty atmosphere containment field. The crystal formation slowly began to shift and change, its internal light growing brighter as individual Zephyrian forms emerged from the matrix like sculptures coming to life. The lead figure was tall and elegant, her body composed of what looked like living diamond that refracted light into rainbow patterns. When she spoke, her voice resonated through the ship's hull like music. "I am Resonance of Morning Light, formerly commander of the 3rd Zephyrian Defense Fleet. You are the humans the Council spoke of. Admiral Sarah Chen, Terran Defense Fleet. Commander, we need to know everything you can tell us about these Devourers." The crystalline being's light dimmed as she accessed her memories. They came from the void between dimensions, creatures of living entropy that exist to consume organized matter and energy. Our weapons were useless against them. When we fired quantum disruptors, they absorbed the energy and grew larger. When we tried to ram them with our ships, they simply phased out of normal space. How many ships did you lose? All of them. The entire 3rd Fleet, over 200 vessels. They consumed our crews first, draining the life energy from their bodies, then dissolved the ships themselves for raw materials. But we learned something important before the end. Sarah leaned forward. What? They cannot phase out of normal space while actively feeding. For the brief moments when they attach to a target to drain its energy, they become partially solid and vulnerable to physical attack. But the window is very small, perhaps 5 to 10 seconds at most. Any other weaknesses? They seem drawn to high-energy sources. Our main battle stations, the ships with the most powerful reactors, were always targeted first. They also appear to have difficulty processing certain types of matter, specifically materials that have been exposed to extreme gravitational fields or high radiation. Our science ships that had been studying neutron stars lasted longer than our clean energy vessels. Sarah processed this information, her mind already working on tactical possibilities. The Devourers were vulnerable when feeding, drawn to high-energy targets, and had trouble with radiation-hardened materials. All of this aligned with humanity's strengths rather than their weaknesses. Commander, we're going to need your people's sensor capabilities. Our instruments can barely detect these things, but I suspect your crystalline nature allows you to perceive them more clearly. Yes, Admiral. We can see their quantum signatures even when they phase out of normal space. We can serve as your targeting coordinators if you can provide us with protected positions on your ships. Before Sarah could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. The tactical display lit up with dozens of new contacts appearing from seemingly empty space around the fleet. Admiral, we have incoming, shouted Lieutenant Commander Martinez. Multiple contacts bearing down on the fleet from all directions. Sarah moved to the command chair, her training taking over. All ships battle stations. Defensive formation Omega-7. Do not engage until they commit to an attack run. Through the viewports, the Devourers became visible as tears in space itself, like wounds in reality that hurt to look at directly. They moved without engines or propulsion systems, simply willing themselves through space by manipulating the quantum foam that underlied normal matter. There, Resonance of Morning Light said, her crystalline hand pointing toward the lead creature. That one is preparing to feed. In 3 seconds it will become partially solid. Target that contact with main batteries, Sarah ordered. All ships focus fire when the targets solidify. The Devourer swept toward the cruiser UES Yorktown, and for a moment Sarah watched in fascination as the creature began to phase into normal space. It looked like a living shadow made of crystallized darkness with tentacles that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. Now, Sarah shouted. The Yorktown's main guns fired, sending streams of accelerated tungsten penetrators directly into the creature's center mass. Unlike the energy weapons favored by most Council species, human kinetic weapons relied on pure physical force to destroy targets. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The Devourer's form exploded in a shower of what looked like liquid starlight, its quantum structure unable to maintain coherence when subjected to massive physical trauma while partially solid. Target destroyed, came the triumphant report from the Yorktown's captain, but the victory was short-lived. Even as the first Devourer died, 6 more swept toward the human fleet. Sarah watched as they moved with obvious intelligence, spreading out to avoid concentrated fire and targeting the ships with the most powerful reactor signatures. They learn fast, she muttered. All ships prepare for close engagement. Resonance of Morning Light. We need continuous targeting data. Understood, Admiral. My people are linking our perception systems to your tactical networks now. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded military history. The Devourers flowed around the human fleet like liquid shadow, phasing in and out of normal space to avoid weapon fire. But each time they solidified to feed, the combined firepower of human kinetic weapons and Zephyrian targeting data found them. Sarah quickly realized that her fleet's brutal, straightforward approach was perfectly suited to this enemy, where Council ships carried sophisticated energy weapons that the Devourers could absorb. Human ships carried mass drivers designed to punch through asteroid belts and particle cannon that fired streams of accelerated matter. Admiral, they're adapting their tactics, reported Commander Hayes. The larger ones are staying phased while the smaller ones attempt feeding runs. Then we adapt too. All ships prepare ramming protocols. If they want to feed on our reactors, they can have a face full of antimatter containment breach. It was a desperate tactic that would have horrified any Council military commander. But Sarah's crews had trained for situations where ship loss was acceptable if it eliminated a threat to human survival. As the Devourers moved in for another attack, 3 human destroyers deliberately overloaded their containment systems and rammed directly into the largest creatures. The explosions lit up the void like miniature supernovas, taking out half the remaining Devourers in a display of raw destructive force that no Council species would have considered acceptable. But as the light faded and the tactical display cleared, Sarah realized they had won only the first engagement. Deep sensor scans were detecting massive energy signatures moving through the void toward their position, and the quantum distortions suggested something far larger than the creatures they had just fought. "Admiral," Resonance of Morning Light said quietly, her crystalline form pulsing with patterns of deep concern. "What approaches is not just a hunting pack. That is a devourer hive construct, large enough to consume an entire star system in one feeding cycle." Sarah looked out at the approaching darkness and smiled grimly. The galaxy's most dangerous predators were about to discover why humanity had earned the right to leave their death world in the first place. The hive construct approached through the void like a mountain of living darkness, its surface writhing with tentacles that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Admiral Sarah Chen watched the tactical display in grim fascination as her sensors struggled to comprehend what they were seeing. The creature was easily the size of a moon, its quantum signature so massive that it was actually warping space-time around itself. "Energy readings are off our scales, Admiral," reported Commander Hayes, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. "Whatever that thing is, it contains enough concentrated entropy to sterilize a solar system." Sarah nodded, her mind racing through tactical options. The human fleet had proven that the smaller devourers could be killed with kinetic weapons and superior timing. But this was something entirely different. This was a creature that could probably swallow her entire fleet without slowing down. "Resonance of Morning Light, what can your people tell us about this thing?" The crystalline being's form had dimmed to a pale shimmer, her usually musical voice now flat with despair. "That is what destroyed our homeworld. We called it the Prime Devourer, the source from which all others spawn. It does not hunt like the smaller ones. Instead, it positions itself at the center of a star system and simply consumes everything within several light years. Stars, planets, even the quantum vacuum itself becomes food for its endless hunger. Surely it has the same vulnerabilities as the smaller ones." "In theory, yes. But Admiral, that creature is so large that even if we could damage it, the destruction would release enough energy to sterilize everything within a parsec. We would die along with it and our deaths would accomplish nothing." Sarah stared at the approaching nightmare, her tactical mind working through possibilities. Every conventional approach ended in defeat or mutual annihilation. But as she watched the creature's approach, she began to notice something strange in its movement patterns. "Commander Hayes, analyze the creature's trajectory. Where is it heading?" "Calculating now, Admiral. Based on current vector and velocity, it's heading directly for the galactic core region. Specifically, it appears to be targeting the Nexus cluster." Sarah felt her blood run cold. The Nexus cluster contained over 300 inhabited star systems, including the capitals of a dozen major species. If the Prime Devourer reached that region, it would consume more than 1 trillion lives. How long until it reaches the cluster? At current speed, approximately 47 days. "Not enough time to evacuate," Sarah muttered. "And even if we could, where would they go? This thing seems capable of consuming entire sectors of space." As she spoke, more contacts began appearing on long-range sensors. Ships were arriving from across the galaxy, drawn by desperate transmissions from Council species. But these were not the elegant vessels of the major civilizations. These were the crude, heavily armored ships of the galaxy's outcasts and survivors. "Admiral, we're receiving hails from multiple vessels," reported Lieutenant Commander Martinez. "Looks like word has spread through the Deathworld networks." Sarah smiled grimly. The Deathworld networks were informal communication channels used by species that came from high gravity, high radiation, or otherwise hostile planets. They were the galaxy's survivors, the races that had been forged in crucibles of constant danger. "Put them through." The main display filled with a dozen different alien faces, each representing a species that the Council considered too primitive or dangerous for full membership. There was Captain Vextar of the Obsidian clans, whose people had evolved on a planet racked by constant volcanic activity. Commander Thackrol of the Iron Moon Collective, a silicon-based species that lived on asteroids bombarded by cosmic radiation. Fleet Leader Zara Khan of the Storm Riders, whose homeworld was swept by hurricanes that could strip the atmosphere from smaller planets. "Human Admiral," Vextar spoke first, his voice like grinding stone. "We received your tactical data on these devourers. Our species have fought similar entities before, during the entropy wars 3 millennia ago. You've faced these creatures before? Not exactly the same, but close enough. Entities that feed on organized matter and energy, that exist partially outside normal space-time. We learned then that such creatures have one critical weakness that the Council species never discovered. Sarah leaned forward. What weakness? They cannot exist in environments of maximum entropy, Commander Thackrul interjected, his silicon form sparkling with internal light. Create enough chaos, enough random destruction, and they lose the ability to maintain coherence. They require some level of organization to feed upon. Deny them that, and they simply dissolve. How do we create that level of entropy? Captain? Vextar's image smiled, revealing teeth like broken obsidian. By doing what Deathworld species do best, Admiral. We create disasters so massive that even creatures of entropy cannot survive them. Over the next 6 hours, as the Prime Devourer continued its inexorable advance toward the galactic core, the assembled Deathworld fleets worked out a plan that would have horrified any Council strategist. It was brutal, direct, and involved the deliberate destruction of an entire star system to create a trap that nothing could survive. The key is the Eta Carinae system, explained Resonance of Morning Light, who had been working with the Deathworld species scientists. It contains a hypergiant star that is already on the verge of collapse. If we can trigger a controlled stellar detonation while the Prime Devourer is in the system, the resulting hypernova will create a region of such intense entropy that the creature will lose molecular coherence. How do we get it to enter the system? Sarah asked. By offering it what it wants most, Commander Thackrul replied. The largest concentration of organized energy in this sector of space. We position our combined fleets in the system, overload all our reactors simultaneously, and create an energy signature so massive that the creature cannot resist investigating. Fleet Leader Zarakan's expression was grim. It will be a suicide mission for most of us. The stellar detonation will destroy everything within 3 light-years of the star. Not necessarily, Sarah said slowly, an idea forming in her mind. What if we could trigger the detonation remotely, after the Prime Devourer was committed to the system? Human ships are designed with redundant faster-than-light systems for emergency evacuation from dangerous regions. The timing would have to be perfect, Vextar warned. Too early and the creature escapes. Too late and we all die with it. Then we make sure the timing is perfect, Sarah replied. Resonance of Morning Light. Can your people provide precise tracking data on the creature's quantum signature? Yes, Admiral. My species can monitor its dimensional phase state and predict when it will be most vulnerable to the entropy cascade. The plan that emerged was incredibly complex and desperately dangerous. The combined Deathworld fleets would position themselves throughout the Eta Carinae system, using their ship's reactors to create an irresistible energy signature. When the Prime Devourer entered the system and began feeding, they would trigger a cascade failure in the hypergiant star, while simultaneously executing emergency FTL jumps to escape the blast radius. But success would depend on split-second timing, perfect coordination between species that had never worked together before, and the hope that human engineering could get them out of the blast zone before the hypernova consumed everything. As the fleets began moving toward the Eta Carinae system, Sarah reflected on the irony of the situation. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had failed against the Devourers because they fought with precision and elegance. But the survivors, from the galaxy's most dangerous worlds, were about to attempt something that required the opposite approach, the deliberate creation of the largest disaster in recorded history. Admiral, Resonance of Morning Light said quietly, I want you to know that my people are honored to fight alongside yours. Win or lose, the galaxy will remember that when the void itself threatened all life, it was the children of Deathworlds who stood against it. Sarah nodded, watching as the combined fleet moved through space like a constellation of mobile fortresses. Each ship represented a species that had learned to thrive in environments that would kill most life forms. Together, they were about to put that hard-won expertise to the ultimate test. The Prime Devourer followed them through the void, drawn by the promise of the greatest feast in galactic history. It had no way of knowing that it was being led toward a trap that would turn its own hunger against it. The Eta Carinae system was a monument to stellar violence, its hypergiant star burning with the fury of a million suns while spewing matter across space in spectacular stellar winds. Admiral Sarah Chen watched from the bridge of the UES Defiant as the combined Deathworld fleets took their positions throughout the system. Each ship carefully placed to maximize the energy signature they would present to the approaching Prime Devourer. All ships report ready, Admiral, Lieutenant Commander Martinez announced. Reactor overload sequences are programmed and standing by. Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on the tactical display where the massive Devourer construct appeared as a dark wound in space, still 3 hours away, but approaching with unstoppable determination. Around her, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency, their faces showing the calm focus that came from accepting that they might not survive the next few hours. Resonance of morning light. What's the creature's current status? The crystalline being's form pulsed with anticipation. It has detected our energy concentration and is accelerating its approach. The quantum signature indicates it is preparing to enter full feeding mode when it reaches the system. Perfect. That means it will be partially solid and vulnerable when we trigger the stellar detonation. Sarah turned to her communications officer. Signal all ships. Begin reactor overload in sequence. I want us to look like the most irresistible target in galactic history. Throughout the system, ships began pushing their power cores beyond safe limits. Human antimatter reactors, Obsidian Clan volcanic energy taps, Iron Moon collective stellar furnaces, and Storm Rider atmospheric processors all began building toward critical overload. The combined energy signature was so massive that it actually began warping local spacetime, creating gravitational eddies that made navigation difficult. Admiral, the hypergiant is responding to our energy emissions, reported Commander Hayes. The stellar matter is becoming increasingly unstable. If we trigger the cascade now, we'll get a clustering hypernova with an effective radius of 3.2 light-years. Hold position. We need the Devourer fully committed to the system before we light the fuse. The waiting was the hardest part. Sarah watched as the Prime Devourer drew closer, its massive form blotting out stars as it moved. When it finally entered the outer edge of the system, the creature's presence created visible distortions in spacetime, causing the hypergiant star to flicker and pulse in response to the quantum interference. 1 hour to contact, Martinez reported. All ships, prepare for emergency FTL jump on my mark. Remember, we get one chance at this. If the timing is off by even a few seconds, we all die together. 30 minutes later, the Prime Devourer began extending feeding tentacles toward the nearest ships. Sarah watched in fascination as Captain Vextar's flagship, the Molten Hammer, held position even as dark tendrils of entropy began wrapping around its hull. Vextar, get out of there. Not yet, Human Admiral, came the Obsidian Warrior's reply. My ship is built to withstand planetary volcanic eruptions. I can take more damage than most. We need the creature fully extended before we spring the trap. Sarah's respect for the alien captain grew as she watched him hold position, while his ship's hull began to dissolve under the Devourer's touch. Around the system, other Deathworld captains were doing the same thing, allowing the creature to begin feeding on their vessels to ensure it would be vulnerable when the trap was sprung. Resonance of morning light. How much longer? The creature is achieving maximum extension. In 20 seconds, its quantum structure will be locked into normal spacetime and unable to phase out. Sarah gripped her command chair as she watched the tactical display. The Prime Devourer was now fully committed to its feeding, its massive form wrapped around a dozen ships as it began draining their energy. For the first time since the crisis began, the creature was completely solid and vulnerable. All ships execute emergency jump on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark! The combined fleet vanished in a cascade of FTL translations, leaving only the overloaded reactor cores of their sacrifice ships behind. Sarah felt the familiar disorientation of emergency FTL as the Defiant jumped to the edge of the system, just outside the projected blast radius. But the plan was only half complete. Now came the most critical part. Fire the stellar torpedo, Sarah ordered. Deep in the heart of the Eta Carinae hypergiant, a specially designed human weapon detonated. Unlike conventional explosives, the stellar torpedo was designed to trigger cascade reactions in stellar matter, turning the star's own fusion process into a runaway chain reaction. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The hypergiant star began collapsing in on itself, its core temperature rising to levels that shouldn't have been possible. Then, in a flash of light that outshone the rest of the galaxy, it exploded in a hypernova that would be visible from neighboring galaxy clusters. The Prime Devourer, caught in the midst of feeding and unable to phase out of normal space, had perhaps 3 seconds to comprehend what was happening before the wavefront of superheated stellar matter struck it. The creature's scream was audible across multiple dimensions as its quantum structure began to unravel under the assault of maximum entropy. Sarah watched through heavily filtered sensors as the impossible occurred. The Prime Devourer, a creature that had consumed entire star systems, simply dissolved as its ability to maintain molecular coherence failed. The hypernova's entropy field was so intense that even beings of living darkness could not survive its touch. But the destruction didn't stop there. The explosion created an expanding sphere of pure chaos that began affecting the smaller devourers throughout the region. One by one, they flickered out of existence as the entropy wave reached them, their quantum matrices unable to function in an environment of total disorder. "Admiral, we're detecting similar effects across the entire sector," Commander Hayes reported with amazement. "The entropy cascade is spreading through the Devourer's quantum network. Every creature connected to the Prime Devourer is being affected." Sarah watched the tactical display as red contacts began winking out across dozens of star systems. The Devourers that had seemed unstoppable just hours before were dissolving like shadows at sunrise, their ability to exist in normal space-time undermined by the massive entropic disruption. Communication from the Galactic Council. "Admiral," Martinez announced. Sarah nodded. "Put them through." Ambassador Keithvar's image appeared on the display, his 4 eyes wide with disbelief. "Admiral Chen, our sensors are showing impossible readings. The Devourer threat appears to be gone." "Confirmed, Ambassador. The Prime Devourer has been destroyed, and the entropy cascade appears to have eliminated the entire swarm. The threat has been neutralized. How is that possible? Our greatest minds said these creatures couldn't be destroyed." Sarah smiled grimly. "Your greatest minds were thinking like civilized beings, Ambassador. Sometimes the solution to an impossible problem is to stop trying to be elegant and start being destructive. We didn't defeat the Devourers with superior technology or brilliant tactics. We defeated them by creating a disaster so massive that even creatures of entropy couldn't survive it." Over the following days, as the human fleet and their Deathworld allies conducted damage assessment and rescue operations, the scope of their victory became clear. The Devourer threat had been completely eliminated, with no remaining creatures detected anywhere in the galaxy. The entropy cascade had spread through their quantum network like a virus, destroying entities that had terrorized civilized space for months. But the cost had been significant. 17 ships had been lost in the final battle, along with their crews who had volunteered to serve as bait for the Prime Devourer. Their sacrifice had saved trillions of lives across hundreds of star systems. At the memorial service held in Earth orbit, representatives from across the galaxy gathered to honor the fallen. But more importantly, they came to acknowledge a new understanding of what it meant to survive in a hostile universe. Today we remember that, when the darkness threatened to consume all light, it was answered not by the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, but by its most dangerous children, Ambassador Keithvar said in his speech. "The species we once dismissed as primitive warriors have proven themselves to be the galaxy's truest guardians." Sarah stood with the other Deathworld commanders as the service concluded, watching as ships from dozens of species paid their respects to the dead. The galaxy would remember this day not just as a victory against an impossible threat, but as the moment when the survivors from the most hostile worlds proved their worth to civilized space. The SOS that had echoed through the void had been answered, not by diplomacy or advanced technology, but by the raw, uncompromising determination of beings who had learned to thrive where others could not even survive. And in the cold depths of space, where the Eta Carinae system had once been, a new nebula was slowly forming from the dispersed matter of the hypernova. It would burn for millions of years, a monument to the day when humanity and its allies had stood against the dark and refused to let the universe die quietly. The Deathworld species had found their place in the galaxy at last, not as the crude barbarians others thought them to be, but as the guardians who would stand watch against threats that civilized minds could not comprehend.